that feeling, right? You're teaching maybe right in the middle of a lesson you've worked hard on, and you see it. That student, maybe they're fidgeting constantly or just gazing out the window, or maybe they blurt out something, totally off topic.
Derails everything.
Exactly. And it's tough trying to reach that student, keep them locked in while managing everyone else. It's something teachers deal with like every single day.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it really gets at the complexity of supporting students with neurodevelopmental differences right there in the
Yeah.
classroom. It's not just about, behavior management. It's deeper. It's understanding why it's happening and finding ways to, well, unlock their potential.
Yes. Exactly. And if you're experiencing that right now, this deep dive, it's for you. We've waded through a pretty big stack of sources, research papers, clinical stuff, practical guides, all looking at ADHD in kids and teens, but specifically how it plays out at school.
Right. Our mission today, really, is to pull out the most important bits from all that reading. We want to
Mhm.
surface the key findings, the useful insights, and maybe most importantly, the practical strategies these sources say actually work for supporting a student with ADHD. The goal is simple. Help that student not just get by, but actually do well, thrive in your classroom.
Because it's so clear from the research, ADHD isn't just like having extra energy or trouble focusing sometimes. It's actually understood as a neurodevelopmental disorder. And what's really striking, something the sources hit on again and again, is how often it comes with other conditions.
Oh, the comorbidity rates are high.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking high rates of stuff like specific learning disorders,
Yeah.
trouble with reading or math anxiety disorders, even things like ODD, oppositional defiant disorder.
That comorbidity point is, well, it's huge. It means you're often not just dealing with one thing. It's usually a mix. And the underlying picture, according to some of the brain imaging studies mentioned in these articles, it points to different brain activation patterns. Specifically, researchers talk about reduced activation. Sometimes they call it hypoactivation.
Hypoactivation. Okay.
Yeah, in brain areas that are really critical for executive functions, like the frontal parietal network, and also in the systems that help direct our attention, like the ventral attention system.
Okay, hold on. That sounds pretty technical. Hypoactivation.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for me as a teacher? How does that, show up in the classroom?
Right, that's the key link, isn't it? So when those brain areas aren't firing quite as strongly, the insight from the research is that it directly impacts things we see every day. Things like a student's ability to sustain focus, to regulate their activity level, or, crucially, control their impulses. Think about that frontal parietal network and executive functions planning, organizing, working memory. If there's reduced activation there, well, that can look like struggling to even start a task, or difficulty holding on to instructions, maybe problems managing time.
Right.
And the ventral attention system, that helps us notice important stuff and shift focus. So differences there make it harder to, say, tune out distractions or switch attention when the teacher asks.
Ah, okay. So it's really not about them choosing to misbehave. It's like the wiring makes these tasks that seem easy for others genuinely harder for them. That really reframes things.
Exactly. It shifts the whole lens from maybe a discipline problem to a support need.
Yeah.
Like you said at the start, the sources point out that the core symptoms, the inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, they directly translate into those classroom challenges.
Okay, let's break those down a bit more from what the research says. Inattention first. What does that actually look like in a school setting?
Well, the studies describe it as, difficulty staying focused on tasks, especially tasks that are maybe repetitive or need sustained mental effort. It's the student who maybe doesn't seem to be listening even when you talk right to them. Or they struggle to follow through on instructions. They might start okay, but then get easily sidetracked or just, well, forget what they were meant to do. Finishing work, keeping materials organized. Those can be real hurdles too because of that inattention piece.
Okay. And hyperactivity. We often picture, the kid literally bouncing off the walls. But is it more nuanced than that in the research?
It definitely is. While, yeah, it can be that constant fidgeting, squirming, needing to move. The material notes that, especially in older kids, adolescents, it often shows up more as like restlessness.
Restlessness.
Yeah, an internal feeling of needing to move, maybe tapping pencils, bouncing knees, that sort of thing. It might not be running around the room, but it's still there, making it hard to sit still and focus for long periods.
Right. Restlessness is a good word for older kids. And impulsivity, the classic blurting out answers.
That's a perfect example. Impulsivity shows up as difficulty waiting their turn, interrupting conversations or lessons, maybe answering questions before you've even finished asking them, or just making comments without really thinking through the consequences. It can cause problems socially too, not just in class.
Wow, it's really striking how those kind of diagnostic criteria you read about map so directly onto behaviors we actually see.
And something else the research really flags as critical for effective support is uh, careful observation, really trying to figure out the root cause of a behavior. Like, is a student not following directions because they're being oppositional? Or is it genuinely down to inattention and forgetfulness because of ADHD?
That's a really important distinction.
It's vital.
Yeah.
Because, like we mentioned, ADHD and ODD often co-occur, but the strategies you'd use are different. If you mistake forgetfulness for defiance, your whole approach could be off track.
Yeah, completely wrong response then.
Precisely. And similarly, that constant fidgeting, is it just hyperactivity? Or could it potentially be something else like a tic? Or maybe a stereotypy?
Stereotypy.
Yeah, those are repetitive, often kind of ritualistic movements or sounds, sometimes seen with conditions like Tourette's or even autism spectrum disorder. Because ADHD also has high comorbidity with those conditions, the research really stresses, understand the nature of the behavior first. That's step one for the right support.
That makes so much sense. You sort of have to be a behavioral detective, using what the sources tell us about these potential differences. And you mentioned comorbidities earlier. How do the sources say those add extra layers in the classroom?
Oh, they definitely compound the challenges. Studies consistently show high rates of specific learning disorders, like dyslexia or dyscalculia.
Reading and math difficulties.
Exactly. And also language processing issues, problems with working memory. They're all common alongside ADHD. So imagine a student who has ADHD and dyslexia. Their difficulty focusing on the page because of inattention. That's now layered with the huge effort it takes them just to decode the words.
Right, double barrier.
Totally. So supporting them in, say, a reading task means you have to tackle both the attention side and the reading skill gap, often with different strategies working together. The insight there is pretty clear. Just managing the ADHD symptoms might not be enough if these other big learning hurdles are also present.
So it's about the whole student, their entire learning profile, not just the ADHD label.
You got it. And the good news is the research also offers some pretty concrete guidance on how to approach that kind of multifaceted support.
Okay, great. Let's get into those practical strategies the sources recommend. Thinking about those attention difficulties, what techniques are suggested to help students actually stay focused on a task?
Well, a really key approach that comes up is actively breaking down tasks and explicitly teaching students a sort of structured way to start and finish things. One method they describe uses a three-stage process. It's designed to encourage attention and thoughtful responding.
Okay, 3 stages. What are they?
Stage one is stop and listen. Just pause, make sure you've actually heard or read the instruction.
Listen. Got it.
Stage two, look and think. So process the information, look at the task, think about the steps needed.
Stop and listen, then look and think. Simple, clear. But how do you get a student to actually do that?
That's where the practice comes in. The material suggests actively practicing these steps with the student. You might model it yourself first, then guide them to actually say the steps out loud before they begin. Like before starting a math problem, you might prompt them, okay, what do we do first? And help them say, right, first I need to stop and listen to the instructions or read the problem. Then I need to look at it and think about the steps to solve it.
So verbalizing it makes that internal process more concrete for them.
Exactly. It gives them a tool, like an internal script, to fight that tendency to just jump in impulsively or get lost because their attention drifted.
That's really powerful, giving them that script.
Huh.
Okay, what about impulsivity? Especially that calling out, which can be, well, really disruptive. How do the sources suggest tackling that?
Yeah, calling out is a common one. The research suggests a pretty clear sequence for addressing it. First step, start general. A reminder to the whole class that calling out makes learning hard for everyone. It's not acceptable in the classroom. Reinforce the rule without singling anyone out initially.
Okay, set the stage for everyone first. Makes sense.
Yeah. Then, if it keeps happening with a particular student, the material suggests addressing the problem generally, not the person punitively, at least not at first. You might say something like, it's getting very difficult for everyone to hear and learn when people call out and interrupt. Frame it as a classroom community issue.
Right, shifting focus from blaming the student to the impact on the group.
Exactly. It helps teach the why behind the rule. Now, for a more direct but still supportive intervention with that student, the sources recommend using a private signal.
private signal.
Yeah, something you agree on beforehand, just between you and the student.
Yeah.
Could be a small hand gesture, maybe a light tap on the desk, something discreet you can use when you see them about to call out, or maybe right after they do.
Like a nonverbal reminder.
Precisely. And here's the important part. This signal should ideally be linked to some kind of reward system or behavior plan you have with them. The signal basically means, hey, remember, calling out won't earn you points, or whatever the incentive is. It's a quiet prompt, reminds them of the expectation, avoids public shaming.
Ah, okay.
It acknowledges that, look, this is probably impulsivity, not deliberate disruption, and it gives them a structured way to practice managing it.
A private signal tied to a reward system.
Yeah, that sounds like a really effective low stigma approach for that specific behavior. So beyond these specific techniques, what about broader school-based strategies? Did the literature mention other things schools or teachers can do?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The reviews really emphasize environmental and instructional interventions, too. Things like um, minimizing distractions in the classroom itself, thinking carefully about where the student sits, maybe away from windows or busy areas, reducing visual clutter, keeping the workspace organized.
Right, the physical environment matters.
It really does. And how you teach matters too. The material suggests teachers can adapt their instruction, maybe use different formats more often, break lessons into shorter chunks, build in more active learning.
Keep things moving.
Yeah, or even use things like peer tutoring. Having students work together can be really engaging for some kids with ADHD. The main idea is making the learning process itself more accessible, more engaging for someone who struggles with that sustained focus.
So, adapting how we teach, not just managing the behavior around what we teach. Exactly. And then there's another layer, which is directly helping the student build skills. This includes teaching them self-management techniques like how to track their own progress or organize their stuff. Working on social skills is often key too. And importantly, helping them cope with any stigma or negative feelings they might have about having ADHD.
Building those skills seems crucial for long-term success.
Definitely. Equips them with tools for navigating, all aspects of school.
It really sounds like the research is pushing for a comprehensive, wraparound approach, and that probably extends beyond the school walls too, right? The sources mentioned parents.
Absolutely. Multimodal treatment, which the research consistently says is most effective, heavily involves parents. Parent counseling, parent training programs. They're seen as really key components. It highlights how vital that homeschool collaboration is. When parents and teachers are on the same page, using similar strategies, reinforcing expectations, communicating, the support network for the student is just so much stronger.
Yeah, that consistency between home and school feels crucial. And medication often comes up in these discussions. What did the research say about its role, maybe particularly from a teacher's viewpoint?
Well, the literature, especially studies looking at treatment effectiveness, definitely discusses stimulant medications like methylphenidate pretty extensively. They're generally described as working by influencing neurotransmitter activity,
Hmm.
affecting those brain areas we talked about earlier, which in turn impacts the core ADHD symptoms.
Okay. And how does a teacher usually get involved with that?
Teachers play a really important role in assessment, actually. Researchers and doctors often use standardized rating scales. You might have heard of the Conners scales or the ADHD rating scale, the ADHD-RS. Teachers are frequently asked to fill these out. They provide objective data on how often specific behaviors, inattention, hyperactivity, etc., are happening in the classroom, both before and maybe after medication is tried or adjusted.
Right, so teacher observations become valuable data for the medical team.
Exactly. It helps them understand the real-world effects of the treatment.
And did the sources mention potential side effects teachers might notice?
They do. The clinical trials and reviews note that while often well tolerated, these medications can sometimes have non-serious side effects for some kids. Things like headache, maybe decreased appetite, sometimes irritability or drowsiness. The material presents these as, findings from studies. It's important to remember this is just information from the research about potential things that might happen. Teachers aren't diagnosing, obviously, or giving medical advice,
Of course not.
but they might be asked to report observations on those rating scales. And the research also really stresses that how someone responds to medication, it varies a lot from one person to the next.
That variability theme again. Every student is different in how their ADHD shows up and how they respond to support. And there was one other really big factor the research highlighted, wasn't there? Something about expectations.
Yes, This is a really profound point from some of the sources. They talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy. The basic idea is that the expectations people in the student's environment hold, teachers, family, even peers, can actually influence how that student performs.
So, if people expect less because of the ADHD label,
That can unintentionally lead to the student getting less support, maybe fewer opportunities, putting in less effort themselves, and yeah, ultimately achieving less. It can become a negative cycle.
wow.
The research really emphasizes the crucial role teacher expectations play here, maintaining supportive, positive, and genuinely high expectations for a student with ADHD. That's highlighted as being like a powerful intervention all by itself.
Just believing in them makes a difference.
It communicates that belief in their ability to learn and succeed, and that can be incredibly motivating, helping to break that potential negative cycle.
That's a really powerful thought to reflect on the impact of our own mindset. So, okay, let's try and wrap up this deep dive into the research on supporting students with ADHD in class. What's the main takeaway here?
I think the key message weaving through all this material is that really effective support is, well, it's multi-layered and it needs to be informed. It starts with understanding the real nature of the challenges, knowing about potential comorbidities, thinking about those underlying neurological differences in practical ways. Then it's about putting specific evidence-based strategies into action in the classroom. Things like breaking down tasks systematically to build attention, or using those intentional methods like private signals to manage impulsivity.
Right.
And critically, that classroom work gets a huge boost when it connects with what's happening outside home support, medication management, if that's part of the picture. But maybe underpinning everything is that power of holding genuinely supportive, genuinely high expectations for them. It's not just about managing problems, it's truly about building towards their potential.
It's definitely a complex picture, but like you said, the research gives us some clear, actionable paths. And that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Something pulled straight from these sources. The research makes it crystal clear. Long-term outcomes for people with ADHD vary massively. And it also strongly highlights how much impact environmental factors have, things like the expectations they encounter, the quality of the support they get.
So given that, here's something to think about. How might the consistent, thoughtful, tailored strategies you put in place in your classroom, how might they do more than just manage symptoms day to day? How might they actively shape that student's whole trajectory? How much potential for future success and confidence might actually be unlocked by the sustained positive support you provide right there every single day?